As the cold winter approached, the real challenges of solitary wilderness living began. Contestants not only had to fight the extreme cold, but also faced the recurrent issue of food scarcity. Strong winds often tangled their fishing nets, complicating their food-gathering efforts. By the 10th day, only 5 contestants remained. Erica felt bewildered, mainly due to the strong winds the previous night. Sleeping alone in the deep woods was intimidating, and she openly admitted her negative emotions. Without the incentive of $500,000, she would have preferred to go home. Daniel encountered significant trouble the next day when he found he couldn't pull in his fishing net, his only means of sustenance. If he couldn't retrieve it, he might as well quit. But entering the cold 5-degree water also posed a serious risk. After less than 5 minutes, cramps set in, and he was covered in goosebumps once out of the water. If he didn't retrieve the net, the upcoming ice on the water surface would only add to the difficulties, especially with food becoming a major issue. After much consideration, he decided to take the risk, becoming the season's 4th contestant to do so.
Åh, gud vad härligt. Åh, det svider på pungen! Sluta gnäll nu. Såja, här ute i vildmarken.
By the time he got out, his feet were numb. Ida couldn't find her fishing net in the morning either, and feared the storm might have carried it away. She packed up to check and was relieved to find it was just the frame that had fallen into the water. The weather was still decent, so she quickly rectified the situation. To her surprise, she found several fish caught in the net, marking her most bountiful day in the competition. Meanwhile, Erica was not happy today, sitting glumly in front of her camp. Besides not sleeping the previous night, the strong wind had extinguished her fire again. While this might not have been an issue for other contestants, it was a significant challenge for Erica, who struggled with fire-making. After repeated failures to start a fire today, she grew increasingly frustrated and eventually called the show's crew. Unable to make fire was indeed a critical survival flaw, and she became the first contestant in the history of the show to quit because of fire-making issues. With Erica's departure, only 4 contestants remain. The heavy rain soaked Jonas's bedding through, to the point where water could be wrung out from it. Yet, this was not his biggest concern. As of today, he had gone 4 days without catching any fish, which could lead to big problems if it continued. Jonas hurried to the lake to check whenever he had a chance, but most of the time he returned empty-handed. Today, Jonas spotted a reflection in the water from afar and quickly went to retrieve his gill net. Tragically, the big fish was not securely caught and escaped just as he was about to grasp it, leaving Jonas grinding his teeth in frustration and tangling the net in the process. Miraculously, the clumsy fish didn't swim far before it hit the net again. Jonas quickly pulled the fish to shore. It was a huge catch, over half a meter long, and weighing around 17 or 18 kilograms. He decided to grill some of the fish today, and make the rest into smoked fish for gradual consumption. Having a stockpile of food felt wonderful, and Jonas enjoyed the most satisfying meal of the season so far. On the 11th day of the competition, frost began to appear in the forests of Norway. Ida started her morning with some exercise before planning to reset her fishing net. However, tragedy struck when the rope, likely brittle from the low temperatures, snapped with little force. Ida may now have to endure the icy water. She did not strip down as usual for the swim. Once everything was set up, she returned to camp with her legs bright red from the cold, quickly dressed and danced to warm up. Nicole seemed to have the most leisurely time. She was the only contestant in many seasons who hadn't capsized her boat. Thanks to the convenience of her raft, she could place her nets in deep water and usually had good returns. Seeing the raft lower in the water than usual, Nicole even joked about needing to lose weight. Daniel, on the other hand, had some peculiar thoughts today. Without securing any food, he decided to upgrade his sleeping area by cutting down 2 cedar trees, sharpening one end of each and using them as bedposts. He then arranged branches and topped them with pine needles and a sleeping pad, creating a bed more comfortable than the ones at home. By the 12th day, Nicole went early to retrieve her fishing net, but likely used up all her luck previously, as she caught nothing today. Fortunately, she was not too worried since she still had some smoked fish left. The only discomfort was the frostbite on her toes, which showed no signs of improvement despite her efforts. Daniel finally focused on gathering food today and was rewarded with 4 trout. However, he felt no excitement. Even the beauty of the place and the satisfaction of obtaining food had become monotonous, which was not a good sign. To win the $500,000 prize, mere interest wouldn't suffice to last until the end. In the evening, despite making a full pot of fish soup, Daniel felt indifferent towards the food, lacked the motivation to gather firewood or prepare meals, and seemed close to withdrawing from the competition. On the 13th day, Jonas, stable in his mood, only went to check his fishing net daily. Whether or not he caught anything, he returned to his shelter for a cup of pine needle tea, feeling almost as if he wasn't in a competition. He typically ended his days by basking in the sun by the lake. On the 14th day, Ida made a new discovery in the woods, an object that looked like an accessory from a telephone pole, which she found after discovering a wild oil drum previously. Sometimes her luck was simply admirable. She used the object at the fishing net site as a pulley, and it proved to be incredibly useful. On the 15th day of the competition, only 4 competitors remain. Due to the rapid drop in temperature, Daniel spends a significant amount of time each day gathering firewood and checking the fishing nets multiple times. The longer he is alone, the less interesting he finds the situation. He often thinks about his unborn child and questions whether he should have joined this challenge, especially since his fiancée is beautiful and he worries about leaving her alone at home. He sometimes secretly wipes away tears, likely on the verge of quitting. Back at the shelter, he hangs pictures on the wall, wondering how many more days he can endure. Meanwhile, Ida is about to benefit because she has been smelling a faint bad odor, which she finally realizes is coming from her armpits due to not bathing in the cold weather. She goes to the lake intending to use dry moss for washing, but ends up just wiping herself with water, which is somewhat disappointing. After cleaning up, she checks the fishing nets, but unfortunately finds no catch today. She returns to the shelter to grab her gear and tries to find a good spot for fishing, but it starts raining just as she leaves, forcing her to return to camp disheartened. Ida has run out of supplies and expects the coming days to be even harder, but she is determined to keep going as long as she can. Back to Daniel. Starting a fire becomes especially difficult whenever it's windy or rainy, requiring him to blow on it continuously. He wonders why he hasn't built a fireplace for a more permanent solution. Food scarcity has caused Daniel to lose weight, accompanied by dizziness and rapid heartbeat, and without food, it's hard to stay warm, accelerating his pace towards quitting. On the 16th day, it seems that only Nicole still has some food reserves. Having food gives her peace of mind. She eats a piece of salmon for breakfast, then heads to the woods to chop trees. Initially, it seems she wants to reinforce her shelter, but instead, she plans to build a gym, saying life here is too boring and she needs to entertain herself. Nicole uses 3 trees to make a horizontal bar. While other contestants are struggling with hunger, Nicole needs to burn off excess energy. By the 17th day, an 8th-grade storm blows through the area. Daniel, wrapped in his sleeping bag and clothes, still feels extremely cold, particularly in his shelter that leaks air from all sides. He doesn't understand why he hasn't spent time improving it, especially when Jonas's conical shelter is much warmer and better built, with a comfortable bed and plenty of smoked fish left. Ida's shelter is also well maintained. After sealing the drafts, it has become much warmer, allowing her to appear in just a nightgown. However, food remains a challenge for her. Today, she finally catches a lake trout with plenty of roe in the fishing nets, which she enjoys with a cup of 82 lake water, instantly rejuvenating her energy.
Det jag har gjort funkar.
Dagens fångst hade lite rom i sig.
The wind at Daniel's location grows stronger, making it apparent that his shelter's location is particularly windy. His shelter's roof is soon blown off, and upon inspection, he finds the tethered saplings have been blown down. Daniel spends considerable effort to fix it, but it seems likely that his shelter will eventually collapse. Nicole, on the other hand, is facing a different issue of having too much food and comfort, leading to an excess of energy that she struggles to expend. Similar to Daniel's lack of enthusiasm, she's not ready to give up yet, so she continues to endure. Jonas has also been feeling quite cold these past few days, but fortunately, no major issues have arisen. His hands and feet just feel a bit chilly. Daniel, however, is different. His hands are so cold he struggles to tie his shoelaces. After resting for a while, he tried again, but eventually gave up. As the sun set and night fell, several contestants began to assess the situation calculating how many people were still in the field and how much food they had left, wondering when these dull days would end. Finally, on the 18th day, Daniel went back to the lake to check his fishing net, having not caught any food for 5 days. His weight visibly decreased, puzzling him as to why such a large fishing net often failed to catch even a single fish. In the end, he could only squat by the lake, downcast, basking in the sun. The scene shifts to Nicole, who is showing off again. She thought she wouldn't be seen with the raft, but she was just flaunting that she hadn't lost weight, spinning in front of the camera for 5 minutes before setting up the fishing net with the raft. Unfortunately, she caught only 1 fish today, so she returned to camp and went out to gather some berries. Jonas had a good day, though the catch was not large. He always managed to get something bigger than expected, such as a fish over 1/2 meter long. He quickly grilled it to a golden brown at the shelter and savored it.
Tårtslag. Det är så gott. Det är så stora bitar.
By the 19th day, Daniel went to check the fishing line and unexpectedly found a big fish on it. To capture this exciting moment, he brought over the camera, but in the next second, tragedy struck as the fish got off the hook just as he was pulling it ashore. Daniel was stunned and nearly had a breakdown.
Kolla, kolla, kolla! Nej, nej, nej! Nej!
On the 22nd day, despite strong winds and waves, Jonas decided to set the net in the water, but soon gave up as the net kept rolling back, risking entanglement. If something went wrong, they would starve. Frustrated, he returned to the shelter, unsure when the storm would end. As the wind grew stronger at night, the situation for the 4 hungry people varied. Daniel struggled to keep the fire going. Nicole listened to the wind bored in the shelter. Ida worried about being hit by a falling dead tree, while Jonas, who had fortified his shelter, was ironically the worst off. A gust of wind suddenly blew his shelter away while he was eating fish, causing trouble.
Där rök mitt hem. Jag blev hemlös. Okej.
Rebuilding in the dark was unrealistic, and sleeping outdoors could lead to freezing to death, so he had to make do with a corner for the night. The next day, Daniel's situation wasn't much better, but the leaky shelter somehow held up for another day, a miracle even to him. With the wind and rain stopping, Daniel became increasingly melancholic, mainly due to his severe weight loss. He feared being carried away by doctors or having health issues that would prevent him from seeing his unborn child. So he hurried back to the lake to check the net, which had not been collected during the previous night's windstorm. Surprisingly, the net was not badly damaged, and even more surprisingly, there were 2 fish on it. Not wanting to delay, he quickly returned to shore, where a starving Daniel performed a live sashimi eating show.
Så viktigt, Danne! Så skönt! Tres amigos! Jajamän! Vad bra! Det smakar ingenting. Så det blir inte lätt att vinna.
Back at Jonas's side, today's main task was to rebuild the shelter. To prevent another tragedy of a collapsing house, he added more secure lines and was busy until the afternoon, but finally got it done. It was tiring, but at least they wouldn't have to freeze tonight. Meanwhile, Nicole, despite the strong wind the day before, had not collected the net, so after getting dressed, she hurried to check it in the morning. The net was not lost, but there were no fish. Bored, Nicole could only return to camp and idle away. For her, the biggest problem now was boredom, as the lack of food sapped her motivation for anything except thinking about how many competitors were left and cursively complaining to the air. On the 24th day of the competition, Ida struck it lucky. She started the morning by cursing the dreadful weather and mentioned she barely slept the night before. Following the routine, she went to check the fishing nets. Before even reaching the spot, she noticed the nets were unusually heavy, sinking the buoys beneath the surface. As she slowly pulled them in, she discovered they were full of leaves, which made her unexpectedly happy. Even though the nets were tangled, she was pleased to have gathered material for future fires. Back at the shelter, spreading out the nets likely took a considerable amount of time. In the last couple of days, Nicole seemed as if she were in a state of spiritual ascension, almost reaching a desireless state. If not for the cold weather, she probably wouldn't have bothered gathering firewood. The low temperatures had been tough on her, sometimes only allowing her to sleep a few hours each night. To avoid waking up cold again, she finally decided to put some effort into fortifying her shelter. After working on it, she felt a small sense of accomplishment and emotionally much better. Jonas remained remarkably stable in mood. Each day, he checked the nets and took walks, enjoying the sun when it shone. By day 25, life was leisurely until Ida faced a problem with a net that had been tangled since the previous day. She declared that if she managed to untangle it, the crew should award her for her patience. As the sun rose and set, she persevered and finally untangled the net. With no food reserves, she quickly reset the net in the water. Upon completing this, she felt incredibly strong. By the 26th day, Nicole still had some dried fish left, though it was becoming tough to chew. She mentioned losing weight primarily because her diet was high in protein but lacking in fats, which is not nutritionally balanced. Yet, she still had the energy to exercise, probably out of sheer boredom. Daniel had lost the most weight, a consequence of having no food reserves while trying to emulate others. After gathering some wood, he was so exhausted that he had to lie down as soon as he returned to his shelter. Unexpectedly the next moment, the crew arrived to pick up a contestant, and to everyone's surprise, they chose Nicole, who had the most food. It seems she was too satiated to stay motivated. Without the urgency of needing food, her mind was not focused on survival. A few days of this might be manageable, but several weeks could be unbearable for anyone. Consequently, the contestant most likely to win resigned from the competition. By the 27th day, only 3 contestants remained. With the onset of winter, it had been raining continuously in the forest. Jonas's shelter, previously damaged by wind, now began to leak. He discovered a spring near the fireplace and tried to manage the seepage with stones. Recent bad weather meant no catches for several days, but he suspected the other contestants were not faring any better. Guessing that either 2 or 3 contestants were left, he felt in good health and believed the $500,000 prize was within reach. Jonas's guess was quite accurate. Besides Ida, who was relatively stable, Daniel was on the brink of quitting, especially since his shelter was also leaking and worse off than Jonas's, yet he was too lethargic to fix it. By the 28th day, Daniel seemed as if he hadn't eaten for at least a week. When thirsty, he would fetch a pot of lake water to drink, and when hungry, he would do the same. While Daniel wasn't opposed to eating fish, the recent rise in water levels had made it difficult for him to retrieve his fishing nets as before. After pondering in the shelter, he finally came up with a good idea. Perhaps he could use a fishing hook to catch and pull the net back. At the lake, Daniel began to try his idea and, after much effort, succeeded in hooking the net. Even more exciting, aside from a small fish, the net also contained a large barracuda, possibly the one that had escaped before. Just by the splashing, Daniel knew it was not small. Thanks to this fish, the starving Daniel began to recover. On the other hand, Ida was facing troubles. High water levels combined with strong waves had left her without a catch for 3 days. Fortunately, she spotted a fish upon arriving at her spot today, and quickly retrieved her fishing net, only to find it twisted into a rope. Frustrated, she considered the daunting task of untangling it again. Worse, she accidentally lost a piece of the rope, complicating future fishing. With the water too high and the risk of hypothermia, it felt like misfortune was piling on. Meanwhile, Jonas had dug a drainage ditch around the camp to prevent flooding in the shelter. Strong as ever, he didn't complain about his surroundings. Concerned about food, Jonas decided he couldn't wait any longer. He resolved to find a less windy area, thinking any attempt was better than just waiting. On the 29th day, Daniel experienced problems again. He complained of a splitting headache after dawn, and his sleeping bag was wet from rain, making everything uncomfortable. It seemed he might be looking for an excuse to quit gracefully. Meanwhile, Jonas had a promising fishing net set up. Despite the rising water levels, he ventured out and discovered the net's buoy. He started pulling it up slowly, but the net was snagged. Despite his efforts, Jonas had to abandon the stuck part of the net, thankfully just a small section at the end. Back at the shelter, even the tough Jonas began to cry. In contrast, Ida smartly checked the water level, saw it had risen significantly, and decided to head back to the shelter to conserve her energy. With no food and fishing not an option, Conserving resources was the wisest choice. By the 30th day, the psychological toll was evident, although the persistent rainy weather finally cleared. Ida returned to the lake and was relieved to find her fishing net frame still usable. However, seeing the water level on the other side had risen by at least a meter presented a risky decision. Weighing the risks of entering the water, she reflected on the past month and felt proud to have lasted 30 days. Risking her life for victory seemed unwise, especially since she had already proven her resilience. With the motivation of a $500,000 prize, she still felt young enough to earn such an amount in the future. Surprisingly, Ida decided to call the production team to withdraw, leaving only 2 contestants in the competition. On the 32nd day of the competition, Daniel was up early, sharpening his knife intensely. He started making motions towards his neck, which at first made it seem like he was despairing, but it turned out he was just shaving. Recently, Daniel has been quite relaxed. He hasn't even eaten half of the big fish he caught last time.
Jag har en ny droppe snor i maten.
Det finns 2 saker som gör att jag är kvar fortfarande.
The only thing that could potentially affect his chances of winning now is his longing for his beautiful fiancée. Jonas, on the other hand, feels more melancholic. He has already finished the fish he caught last time and hasn't had any new catches for the past few days. A couple of days ago, his fishing net got stuck and tore, adding to the difficulties of his already not-so-wealthy life. Today was another fruitless day, leaving Jonas starting to panic. On the 33rd day, Daniel mentioned he had a wonderful dream the previous night, where he heard someone eating a large flatbread and smelled a strong aroma. He woke up with drool all over his face, and remembering the dream, felt extremely hungry. He quickly made himself a pot of raw fish slices. Meanwhile, Jonas went to check his fishing net again, only to find it empty. His face visibly thinner than before the competition, Jonas grew worried, especially since today was the day for a medical checkup. Knowing he hadn't eaten much recently, he was terrified of being carried away by the doctors. Daniel, being leaner from the start, faced less concern during his checkup. The doctor warned him about the dangers of losing more than 15% body weight within 3 months, which could endanger his life. Jonas was already at a critical point and was warned to find food quickly or risk being medically evacuated at the next checkup. After the doctor left, Jonas sat in panic, staring at his fishing net into the night, but catching nothing. Daniel adjusted his meals from once to twice a day, but this strained his food reserves and added unprecedented pressure. By the 34th day, Daniel checked the lake and found the water level higher than before the storm. If he didn't catch anything before his supplies ran out, he wouldn't last much longer. Jonas, looking lifeless, spent most of his time staring at the water, hoping for a catch. When he finally felt some weight pulling the rope, he was crushed to find no fish at the end. The absence of a catch was a severe blow, especially with a $500,000 prize at stake that could free him from massaging others for the rest of his life. Daniel also found his fishing net empty and his supplies nearly depleted, scraping every last bit of fish oil from the bones to sustain himself for one more day. The competition was now a battle of will and luck. On the 35th day, Jonas, who had not eaten for nearly 10 days, was too weak to walk. After a thorough check by the medical team, his condition was dire, with a body fat percentage below the critical level and a body temperature of only 36.1 degrees. He had lost about 25 pounds and also faced the risk of low blood pressure. After a discussion, the medical team decided it was too risky for him to continue, and he was advised to withdraw for his safety. Although disappointed, Jonas was not surprised and peacefully packed up to leave after 35 days. With Jonas out, Daniel was the apparent winner, but the producers didn't inform him, maintaining their usual practice. Daniel didn't care much by then. He was ready to leave as soon as his food ran out. By the 37th day, Daniel made a stew from fish bones and berries, which looked unappetizing despite being unsure of the taste. When the medical team visited and casually began another checkup on Daniel, they soon realized they couldn't deceive him any longer. They eventually brought his fiancée to him, and seeing her, Daniel understood everything, and his face lit up with a long, missed smile. Winning the $500,000 brought tears of joy to his eyes, marking the end of the first season of the Swedish version of the wilderness survival show.